Welcome back to Shifting Lanes. My name is Hanson, and for this video, I'm standing right in front of the 2023 BMW M2. This is the G87 chassis, so it's got a new body, new power plant, but it still has the same old recipe of front engine, rear-wheel drive, and this one comes with a 6-speed manual transmission, so this is going to be a lot of fun. And let me give you my review of the exterior, interior, the technology, the power, and the driving experience so that you have a better idea before you buy. And if you want to jump into any of those sections, check out the chapters along the video. Without further ado, let's get this video started on the outside first. When it comes to the exterior design, one word comes to mind, and that is boxy. When I first saw these pictures, I kind of recoiled at it, but I think it is a design that's growing on me. When it arrived at my driveway, I thought it was going to look better in person, and not initially, but over time, it is starting to look a little bit better. And the fact that this seems like a throwback to the old E30 and the E36 M3 makes me appreciate it a little bit more. When you are looking at newer BMWs with their big grills and really questionable styling, this sort of feels like a relief in some way because, again, this is more of a throwback to the older design. Moving to the kidney grills, this looks more unique than the other modern BMWs because there's no black or chrome border around the kidney grills. It's just paint matched. It sort of matches the M3 and the M4 styling, but it doesn't look like any of the other BMWs, so it is special that way. If you look at the headlights, this comes with the Shadow Line headlight package, so it has black inlays, making this look more aggressive. And if you've seen my review of the M240i X-Drive, this looks different than that, but in fact it is the same headlight shape. They've just added this extra plastic piece here to make it look like a new headlight design. For the rest of the front, there's just large openings to feed air into the radiators and the intercoolers, and also to cool the brakes. All of these openings are functional. And at the top you have this nice little bulge here. This is similar to the M240i, giving it an aggressive shape. Moving to the side, this is where you could really tell the difference between the M2 and the M240i because of the wider track. These fenders are about 2 inches wider than the M240i. That's the total width. And it's pretty evident in some lighting conditions because this fender flare here will actually cast a shadow on the rocker panels. That's just how wide this thing is, and I think it looks really good. For the front axle, 19-inch wheels, so you can only get 2 wheel designs for the M2, and it's the same shape, but this has the bicolor finish, so you can tell this has a machine surface, and I think it looks really good. It's that traditional sporty looking wheel design, and right behind it you could find the red calipers. There's 6 pistons there, and it's gripping onto 15-inch slotted and cross-drilled rotors. This is a really nice wheel, brake caliper, and rotor design. It looks super aggressive. And of course, you've got the BMW 50-year motorsport logo on there. You could find this on new BMW M cars, and this is to highlight the heritage and just how long they've been doing this. As for the tires, this comes with the Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tires. These are fantastic tires. I'll talk more about this in the driving experience section, but this is a staggered setup. This one is 275, 35, 19, and if you look at the back, this has a 20-inch wheel version, and this one is 285, 30, R20. So this one is a little bit wider, and it's sitting in front of those 14.5-inch steel rotors with a single red caliper in the back. And if you look at the rear fender flare, you could tell how much wider this is. If you line this up next to an M240i, this thing looks like it's just flexing all the time. For the side view mirrors, you have the traditional M-style side view mirrors, so it has these little winglets here. Up top, you have the carbon fiber roof. This is part of the carbon package, which is $9,900. That's pretty expensive, but if you look at what comes in that package, it might actually be worth it. And at the rear, there's more boxiness here. There's quad exhaust. There's black tips as part of the Shadow Line package. And up here, you have a very subtle trunk lid spoiler. I think it looks okay from the back. It is a sight to behold, but I think it will grow on you. Compared to the styling of other BMWs in their current lineup, I don't think this one actually looks too bad. But if you're thinking that this is an upgrade from the first gen M2 in terms of looks, I don't think this is it. But it stands on its own. The first Gen M2 looks good. This one just has a different identity. And in terms of the paint, this is called Zandvoort Blue. I love BMW blues. They have the Long Beach blue for the first Gen M2. They have the Yas Marina blue for the F80 M3, and then the Portimao blue for the G80. They are very clever with the naming of these blues, named after pretty iconic places. But this one, I think, is the lightest shade yet, and it is the most eye-catching blue out of all of those other blues. Let me know your thoughts about this blue, but I am in love with it. Now, moving to the interior, the most eye-catching thing about the interior is the carbon package. So that $9,900 carbon package comes with this awesome looking bucket seats. These are the best seats I have ever sat on. It looks really aggressive, and it's got that M2 badge that lights up. You also have lots of other carbon fiber trim, and that 6-speed manual transmission is really nice. And if you look at the screen, this is a new dual screen setup. So it's 2 screens, a touch screen on the right-hand side, and then your digital driver display. But it's been seamlessly combined into a single panel, single curved panel actually. And this is something that BMW has been introducing in most of their new lineup. I think it looks very modern, it looks good. Very different than the original M2. So let me know your thoughts if you like this design or if you like the traditional one. But back to the seats, if you've got the spare change, this is really worth your money because this is incredibly supportive. It has these side bolsters that could be adjusted electronically just to give you more support when you're going through high G turns. There's also significant thigh support here and even inner thigh support. So your legs are going to be locked in here as you're driving. This seat will give you the sense that this car is wrapped around you. So you're not moving at all. You are one with the car, and this might just be the best interior upgrade out of any of the BMWs that I've driven. There are some cons to the seats depending on how tall or how big you are. These winglets here might interfere with your shoulders. And also, I thought that it was going to interfere with my shifting, but it actually wasn't. But given how tall I am, I'm 5'8". When I'm using the iDrive 8 controller, this does pinch my shoulder a little bit. So if you're planning on taking this on longer drives, using that controller might get a little bit annoying. But what I found is that between all of these steering wheel controls and also the touchscreen controls, I'm almost never using that iDrive 8 controller. And the big con here is that ingress and egress out of this seat might get a little bit difficult. You're basically going to have to fall into the seat as you're climbing over this thigh rest here. And the last con here is that if you've got some rear passengers who are jerks, they may try to tickle you through these openings here. And I actually like these openings a lot because it adds an extra level of ventilation because this doesn't have ventilated seats. So at least it can keep a portion of your back somewhat cool. Let's try jumping inside. Again, just having to fall in there slightly to get over this hump. This interior is vastly different compared to the first generation M2. Again, this has a more modern styling, and with that modern styling comes a lot of simplification and the disappearance of a lot of buttons. For example, your climate control and radio controls have been simplified to just the volume knob, which I love the fact that they kept that. And also these seek buttons, your hazard light buttons, and also the front and rear defrosters. The climate controls have been moved permanently to the lower portion of the screen. It's always there, so you don't have to worry about it disappearing. But you could always go into the climate menu, and here's where you can control the heated seats, the fan speed, and also which vents are being used. So really simple, but it just takes a little bit to get used to coming from the older generation. You'll also find the other carbon fiber trim pieces here on the dash and also on the storage compartment, which if you open up, there's a little spot for your phone here. There is no wireless charger here. There's some cup holders and also your 12-volt connection and your USB Type A. There is a USB Type C underneath the armrest. And if you look to the controls back here, 6-speed manual transmission. This thing shifts so lovely. It's so much fun. And right next to it, you've got your park sense button, your auto start stop, your engine start stop, and then your drive mode setup, your M mode toggle, and this is your exhaust mode. Here's your electronic parking brake and your traction control off button. And over here, this is your iDrive 8 controller. Before it was a series of buttons, but now this is just a single panel, and it's not even a button. This is a touch capacitive button, so it'll just slightly vibrate when you press on these so-called buttons. But over here, the dial is still your traditional dial, so you could twist and then press down and also toggle up and down, left and right. As for the steering wheel, this has your traditional 3-spoke design. This has a great 9 and 3 gripping position, and as part of that carbon package, you'll see more carbon fiber trim around the steering wheel. And what's unique about this M2 steering wheel are these red drive mode buttons. This is in addition to the M mode style. You have the road, sport, and track, but you could also customize the drive modes. So several different ways of driving this car. And if you go into setup, this is where you control the M1 and the M2 configuration. And on the screen, you could change the different parameters, and I'll talk more about this in the driving experience. And when it comes to the pedal placement, of course, the ergonomics of these pedals are really comfortable. I love the floor-mounted gas pedal. The spacing of all the different pedals is really nice. You could heel toe very easily in this thing. And the only complaint I have is the placement of the dead pedal, and how if you mispress on the clutch, you may bottom out on the dead pedal itself. So it'll take some getting used to properly place where your left foot will be, but very quick adjustment. You'll learn very easily. Within 2 days, I was able to just not hit that. So just something to keep in mind. But in terms of the seating position, I think BMW has knocked this out of the park. Really great shifter placement, awesome steering wheel, and lovely pedals, and also great seats. This BMW M2 has really got this recipe down. As for the technology, there's a lot of tech packed into this car. First, starting off with the display, you've got this really beautiful infotainment display and this digital driver display. This is running on the iDrive 8 infotainment system, and this is a nice upgrade over the previous one. The layout of this thing looks super modern, and of course there's widgets and shortcuts that you can add, so it's very flexible. You could adjust where the pieces and elements will go. You could reorder them. But overall, this is a pretty versatile system. And a little Easter egg here, I don't know if you want to call this an Easter egg or not, but we've got an old school BMW overhead view here. This is definitely not the M2, but looks kind of cool. This also has wireless Apple CarPlay, wireless Android Auto, and Amazon Alexa. And there's a very nice voice assistant here that uses natural language. So it's not like the old awkward iDrive voice assistant. This is much more useful. So you could always call it up with this button or just using the wake word, "Hey BMW." As for the digital instrument cluster, this is very clean looking. You could change it between this style display to the sport display, which will kind of compact things together, and then you could also change it to track mode. And when you go into track mode, this will put the iDrive system in standby mode. So if you have music playing, it'll turn that off, it'll turn off the screen, and it'll change the driver display to something more track focused. The gear information is a little bit bigger, and just the necessary pieces of information are up front and center. This car also has a heads-up display, and that heads-up display can change depending on whatever mode that you're sitting in right now. And one more interesting thing about this M2 infotainment system is that if you go to the apps, there's a built-in M drift analyzer. So this can show you a rating of your best drift, what traction control level, how long the drift duration was, 8 seconds. That's really good. And the drift angle, and also the drift distance. I have not yet tested this out, but for all the drifters out there, you've got a nice little tool here to brag to your friends. When it comes to the engine, this S58 is a monster. The B58 is great in the M240i. That was an inline six with a single twin scroll turbo, and I loved it when I drove that car. I didn't really know where they could go with the M2 because the M240i was already very good. Turns out an extra turbo and another 71 horsepower can really do wonderful things. 0 to 60 in the 6-speed manual is rated at 4.3 seconds according to BMW, but if you're talented, I think you could do it a little faster than that. This also comes with an 8-speed automatic transmission, which is going to be faster, 0.2 seconds faster, 0 to 60, and also more consistent, but there's just so much more joy out of driving the manual transmission. This engine is rated at 450 horsepower and 406 pound-feet of torque. That is so much more power and torque compared to the first gen M2, and BMW underrates the power figures as typical of BMW fashion, and dynos have shown that this is making a little more than what's on paper. But basically, if you take this above 3,000 RPMs and this thing becomes a total brute. The exhaust is loud, and this engine gives the car kind of like a brawler attitude when it comes to the power. Now let's talk about the driving experience, and when it comes to the handling, this M2 feels completely dialed in. The ride is stiff as expected, but the car feels so flat around the corners. These seats are super supportive and they take away that extra uncertainty that you normally get with softer seats. You are so locked in here and the car feels like it was built around you. It also helps that I'm on the PS4S tires. This is an excellent ultra high performance summer tires, and it gives this M2 really generous levels of grip. The wheels and tires feel like extra grippy appendages, and you're just glued on to whatever surfaces that you're on. There are different drive modes in this car that you could quickly get into using these buttons here, and also the M mode button. And if you go into the setup, there are different things that you could tweak that will change how the car behaves. You've got the engine that you could change between efficient, sport, and sport plus. This just changes the throttle response and how immediate it is. The gear shift assistant is like your rev matching feature. And then you have the chassis setting. This changes the damping force in your suspension. All three levels are basically pretty firm, but comfort is the softest setting, and I like to keep everything in Sport Plus. And then you have your electronic steering. Of course, you could change the steering damping in here as well, so you could change the level of effort from not as much to a little bit more. And then since this M2 has the brake-by-wire system, we can control how much pedal travel and how much force is required to apply the same level of brake pressure on the rotors. And then lastly, down here you could change the traction control. There's 10 levels, 0 being completely off and 10 being completely on, all the nannies intervening. But you could only change the traction control level by changing the settings on the traction control system. So if you go into DSC off, here you could change the level of traction control between 0 and 10. But the overall driving experience of this M2 is incredible. There's so much power coming out of the inline-6 twin turbo engine. Power is just immediate. There's not a lot of turbo lag, and the fact that you have this 6-speed manual transmission, you can also spec out an 8-speed automatic transmission, which is going to be faster, but this is so much more fun and engaging to drive. If I were to buy an M2, I would definitely buy the manual transmission. And of course, the seating position, the steering wheel, and the sound of it all just adds so much to the driving experience that I never want to stop driving this thing. This is an excellent driver's car. It feels comfortable inside, but your passengers may not like it as much because, again, these seats are really made for drivers, not really for passengers. And the general ride comfort of the M2 is a bit on the stiff side, so it may be uncomfortable for everyone else. In terms of getting people inside the M2, you actually have a usable back seat here, and taller people have sat back there. And considering that there's a lot of room for the front passenger, they can move it up. But if you're planning on putting 4 people in here, it might get really tight. 3 people is doable, 2 is perfect, 1 is optimal. So that's my review of this BMW M2. So it's got some questionable looks, but I think it's starting to grow on me. It's got that E30, E36 homage. So when I look at it that way, it actually doesn't look too bad. But the most fun thing about this car is just the driving experience. It's so powerful. The 6-speed manual transmission is just so crisp. It handles so good, and I love these tires too. But this is basically the M car for all the enthusiasts out there. It's about the same shape as the old E46 M3, and I think this is the one to get. Let me know your thoughts. I want to thank you so much for watching all the way till the end. If you've learned something from this video, please consider hitting that like, subscribe, and that notification bell so that you can be notified the next time I make a new video. Let's wrap it up right there. My name's Hanson, and this is the 2023 BMW M2, and I'll see you in the next one.